So you're here with Judy McCorkle, City Administrator for the City of Sandersville, and we're talking about the Downtown Cafe project, which is an EPA remediation project. Could you tell us a little bit how this project got started?
Sure. There are some buildings in the downtown area that were not really inhabitable for businesses. They weren't attractive. They had environmental issues, and they had structural issues with it. And we discussed with council several times what we needed to do with those buildings, how to make them productive again. The mayor appointed a 10-member committee of property owners in that area and business owners who mostly will benefit from that or not benefit if you don't do something with it. And we met several times with those business owners. At the beginning of that process, we hired an engineering and architectural firm to come in to meet with us to help us decide if the buildings could be salvaged and what could be done with the buildings, or if they needed to be, something else needed to be done. At the end of that, what was determined was that the cost to rehab the two buildings was just too astronomical for that to be possible. The downtown cafe was a big part of that, and what resulted was a downtown master plan that was 3 phases. The first phase was a building on the corner of downtown to come down in a new park, a street improvement project in downtown, and then on the other end of that project was the downtown cafe. The issues with that was environmental concerns, and we knew we had to address that before we could even acquire the property. And so it resulted from that committee and from the council's concern with the issues. And we also wanted to revitalize that area to get people back in the downtown in that area.
So knowing that this was going to be a remediation project, was EPA your first choice, or how did you determine that EPA was the appropriate partner?
Well, we knew we had to get past the hurdles with EPA, and we knew we needed somebody who really knew how to do that. Small cities often don't have people on staff who can knows the rules of EPA or even Georgia EPD, and how to apply for grants and be successful at it. So we've had a lot of good work done from the regional commission here in our area, and so we contacted Linda Grahava. She has worked with us in many years in the past on CDBG grants and CHIP funds and has been successful most of the time. And we asked her how could we go about applying for this. We applied for the grant in 2015 and did not get it. We applied again in 2016, and we were notified in May of 17 that we had awarded it. But there was a long process that you had to go through to get to that point. But we relied on them for the technical expertise to help us with EPA and EPD.
Were there any pitfalls or anything that you would notice, especially about the grant application process, that you would let other cities want to know about?
Well, it is federal funds. It's very competitive. You're not just competing with people in the state of Georgia. It's all across the country, and it's very hard to get. When you write that grant, it's important to have somebody that knows what they're doing and has some experience and knows how to write the grant. You have to show you have a need, and a lot of times that can be controversial in your community, and we did see that because you want your community to shine in the brightest light. Everything's perfect, wonderful. We have great air quality, great water quality, and everything here. But if you don't have any problems, you're not going to get that grant. So you have to write it to show that you have issues, and sometimes local citizens can take issue with that. But we did have some environmental issues in the past. We did note that in the grant application, and that was key to us being successful in getting the grant, I believe.
And once you received the grant, once you were notified, what was the ensuing process? Was there technical assistance provided by EPA, for example? Did you have a point of contact that you knew you could address with any problems?
Well, you're not notified that you get the grant. You're notified that you have been awarded the opportunity to begin negotiations for a cleanup for a grant. And so it's very technical and everything. And when we received it, we were thrilled, of course, to get the notification because it is so competitive. We contacted the regional commission, and a lady who was referred to us from the regional commission, Gail Jeter from Cardinal was the name of her company. We contacted them and said, okay, we've got the grant. Now, can you give us some direction, some guidance? So we have asked the regional commission to come in and help us to administer that grant, because when you're doing a federal grant, there's a lot of red tape to do that, and we know that everything will be done correctly. prior to getting that, there was a lot of things you had to put in place before you could even apply for the grant. And I think that's important to note. We could not even acquire the building until we did what's called a corrective action plan, prospective purchaser corrective action plan. The reason you do that, it protects you from liability, from lawsuits, from being sued over something that happened to that property prior to you owning it. We went through that process and did the corrective action plan. We submitted it to the Georgia EPD. You had to show that you had the ability and a plan for removing the underground storage tanks and for other substances that didn't meet the Georgia EPD quality standards. And so we provided the corrective action plan, and then once it was approved by the Georgia EPD, then we were able to acquire the building. And then once we had acquired the building, then we could apply for the grant through EPA, which is federal money. Yeah. And that's a long process.
And so it sounds like most of your interactions with EPA were actually sort of filtered through the regional commission.
They were, because they're familiar with how to do that. They've done it with other communities. Right. And
would you say that that's probably the best way to do it for a smaller city?
I would think so. If you're a small city, we're small in numbers. We're at about 6,000, but we think we're big. We act like a big city, But whatever size you are, but primarily smaller cities, you don't always have people who have the expertise to know how to be competitive and to get those grants. And then once you get it, you've got to administer it. And how do you administer those funds and track all that and report all that? So for us, that was the best option. And I would encourage other people who don't have those resources in-house to consider that as an option.
Since this project is not yet completed, it's probably a little bit too soon to ask you for any kind of feedback on the overall process. But if there is any sort of piece of advice that you would have, or anything that other cities might want to consider when they're looking at projects and whether or not to apply for certain grants,
I would encourage you to do like our mayor did. He appointed a 10-member committee to look at the entire master plan that we were working on. This was phase 3 of that, and get some input from local people and some support from local people. Find out what they're interested in, what they'd like to see happen. Make sure that you have a plan for getting the funding in place in case you don't get the grant money. We have had this in our capital plan and our budget for about 4 or 5 years now, so it's been a long process. And each year, the money we set aside, we sort of roll that money over in case you get to a point and you've applied for it several times and you don't get it, then you have to make the decision, are we going forward with the project? So have an alternative source for funding in place and just have patience, because it doesn't happen overnight.
Right. You mentioned funding quite a bit. So how exactly did the EPA grant fit into the overall master plan and the whole series of projects that you wanted to complete with?
Well, as I said, it was part of a downtown master plan. The first phase was a park on the downtown area. The second phase was the street improvement project, and then this was the third phase. So we had to look at all the revenue sources that were options for us to look at, like LMIG funds, local maintenance improvement grant funds for street projects, transportation T-SPLOS funds, that was part of the funding source, grants, and then private contributions, private donations. And for the entire master plan, we've raised a significant amount towards the park. And so when you raise that much towards one phase of this, that leaves other funds available to do this project with. We did budget to receive about $150,000 for the grant, and we received $151,103. So we were pretty close. This project is estimated to be about $191,000. That doesn't include the acquisition of and doing the corrective action plan. The acquisition of the property was another $100,000. That was paid out of SPLOST. And if we had not gotten the grant funds, we were prepared to use SPLOST money. And it may have delayed the project a little further until we were able to come up with SPLOST funds. But that was our other source if we had not gotten the funds to do it with.
And SPLOST money will also cover the difference between the grant and the overall $190,000.
It will. It will. It will. And we had been setting aside this amount in SPLOST in our capital budget for several years, so we've been building up a little bit. Now that we have gotten the grant, those SPLOST funds can be used towards other projects.
Right.
So that was what was important for us, is you have to kind of prioritize your projects and pick and choose the ones that's important, And the ones that are important to your community and to your council, that's really what takes precedence. And so you have to make those decisions.
When do you think this will be completed?
We would like to see it done by June of next year. We think it should be completed by then. We, as I said, have received notice that we've received it. You have to attend a workshop that is mandatory. That is in December. And we have someone in-house that will be going to that, along with someone from the Regional Commission will be going to that. So we don't expect to see, it is a reimbursable grant, so you need to be prepared for that too. That means you have to spend the money up front, then you get your funds back. So you have to prepare your cash flow for that. And so we feel like that we hope to have it done by June of next year and maybe have our funds back in place by that time, be reimbursed with the grant funds by that time.